Hello, everyone. I know there'll be some people joining as we go. Welcome to the Data in the Service of Cultural Tourism session run by me, Helen Palmer. I'm speaking to you from Manchester in the northwest of England. As you'll know, if you've attended any of the other sessions, the transversal theme for Data Eco Culture is inclusion and diversity. You can join the chat around the conference, as you probably already know, on social media using the hashtag #DataEcoCulture. And if you want to contribute to the conversation, post any questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have a live transcriber for this session, so you can select your language, French or English, by clicking on the options at the bottom of your Zoom window. This session is being recorded and will be retransmitted. So if you don't want to appear on recording, please turn off your camera, but I think you've already done that already. So I think we'll kick off. Thank you very much for coming on this session today. So I'll just share the screen and I hope that everyone can see that, and we will just start. So just a little bit about me before getting into the main session. I'm a marketing and audience development consultant. I have spent many decades working in arts, culture, heritage and tourism in the UK and a little bit internationally. I actually did a tourism degree and, funnily enough, studied Canada in depth. I knew it would come in handy at some point, although possibly a little out of date by now. So I've worked on some really big projects like Manchester International Festival, the image on the left, setting that up and delivering the marketing for the first festival, setting up the marketing operation for the Lowry, £100 million arts centre in Greater Manchester, and setting up festival, Contemporary Ceramics Festival in a post-industrial city called Stoke-on-Trent, otherwise known as the Potteries. And I have also, as well as being a consultant prior to setting up this agency, I straddled the worlds of arts, culture, heritage and tourism, as I mentioned. As CT Consults, the agency that I'm representing today, we are a place-based agency, which means we work in destinations all over the UK and a little bit internationally. So here on the left is a picture of York Minster. We did a place brand piece of work for the city. In the middle is a picture from Ghent. We worked with Visit Flanders in Belgium on feasibility for Renaissance tourism as a proposition. And on the right, any Game of Thrones fans might recognise that image, which is in Northern Ireland, where we produced a culture and heritage tourism framework for Northern Ireland. And then we've also worked with London, creating their first cultural tourism vision. And in a town called Cheltenham, which you may not have heard of, but for a small town, it has an abundance of national festivals, and we've done a cultural strategy and a tourism strategy for them. And on the right there is an image from a festival in England's National Forest called the Timber Festival, and we worked with the National Forest to do the feasibility work for that festival. So you can see it's a real range of work that we do. But I'm specifically going to talk about cultural tourism today and data. We have a strong skill set in digital transformation as well. On the left, you'll see that's a screen grab of a website that we run called creativetourist.com, which promotes the cultural offer across the north of England. And on the right is something we call Culture Hosts, which is an integrated online listings platform which powers listings to creativetourist.com. And I'm going to talk more about that later in the session. So what is this session going to cover? Well, I'm just going to very quickly explain what I mean by cultural tourism. Hopefully you all understand that, but there are different viewpoints. So just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to talk about accessing data sets and how to use them. And then I'm going to talk in more detail about partnership working. Now, that's something you will have heard a lot of through this conference. And I was lucky enough to attend the session last night to me, sorry, afternoon to you, about the Toronto majors and the digital collaboration work they've been doing. And there were certainly echoes of some of the work that we've been doing here in the UK. And I'm going to use an example of some work that we do around integrated listings, integrated Google Analytics, and audience data models. All of this is really about understanding your visitors' online journeys, their motivations, their behaviours. You'll do a lot of that work already in understanding your local audiences. Some of you much broader than that. Some of you may already be doing a lot of this work, so you may see parallels. And I'm going to talk a little bit about future uses for data. So hopefully you're all on the right session and that's what you're expecting. So very quickly, what do we mean by cultural tourism? I'm really talking about culture as the primary driver for a visit to a destination. So they've made a purposeful journey. But cultural tourists can also be visitors who choose to engage with culture during their visit. Quite often destinations will have a mix of culture, heritage and arts, but also some of those big name cultural brands that contribute towards a place's narrative, contribute towards what that place is known for locally, nationally and internationally. And of course, cultural tourists can be day visitors, they can be overnight visitors, they can be visiting friends and relations, they could also be on a business trip. They fall into a number of different categories. But we're talking here about people who are already culturally engaged in their own area from where they come from. So these are not hard to reach audiences. They're likely to spend more and they will also be digitally savvy. So they'll be on social media, they'll be sharing information. But these people are looking for memorable and shareable experiences, and that's really important. These are not passive visitors. These are visitors who want to get more involved in a destination, really get under the skin of the place. And so they're looking for quality, authentic and distinctive places and experiences that offer them value to them. And that might be to do with value for money, but that might be also to be value in terms of time. But of course, culture doesn't work in isolation. There's also the wraparound offer, as we call it. So food and drink and leisure and all of those other experiences. And that's really important when you're looking at cultural tourism. And if you're working in a partnership, you need to think about the partners you have round the table and how representative you are of your destination. So a little bit about identifying cultural tourists in the data that you already have. And you may already have done this, but if you haven't, here in the UK, we tend to look in terms of drive time. Now, obviously in the UK, we are a much smaller country than Canada. So drive time will mean something quite different to us. But understanding how far people are traveling, where that crossover is between them being a local visitor and being a tourist. Now, we use what we call postcodes. I know in Canada, they're classed as zip codes. And I'm sure that they are very important for you in profiling your audiences. They're also important for visitors and thinking about, are you capturing the right data to be able to understand who those visitors are and where they're from? Are you mapping your audiences to understand that profile? Can you do more to better understand your tourists? And what market research are you doing already? Can you add to that market research to get a bit more information about your cultural tourists? Can you find out more about their motivations? So Why are they coming to engage with you? Have they been brought by a friend or a relative? Have they made a special journey to see you? Have they come for a particular aspect of your offer? And then understanding what they do when they come to you. That's really important as well. So are they interested in a more leisure offer nearby? Are you part of a wider day trip or a weekend stay? How does that work? And then segmentation. Now, I could spend the whole session talking about segmentation, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about it during the conference. Most audience segmentation tools that we come across don't actually factor in tourists because they're very much focused on the local audiences. So you need to think about, have you got segmentation that works for tourists? Can you work with whoever provides that segmentation tool to help you think about gaining more insight about tourists? So I've done a bit of research before doing this session to have a look at existing national and province, and actually down to city level tourism data sets in Canada. Now, obviously, there'll be masses of data available, but I've just picked out some. And what struck me is that cultural tourism is not recognised as an industry sector at a national level. And that's not surprising, to be honest, because a few years ago, that was exactly the same in the UK. There's lots of national and international tourism data sets, but I couldn't see reference specifically to culture and heritage. So, for example, at a province level, I didn't find culture and heritage, but what I did find was sites and attractions. So I'm assuming that culture and heritage is probably included in that because it seemed the only one of the criteria where it would fit. And what tends to happen in tourism data sets is there is a focus on tourist arrivals. So where have they come from? Transport modes. What form of transport have they used to reach the destination? And hotel occupancy. So that's the same here in the UK. But what we're starting to see is a broader understanding of the role of culture and heritage within tourism and how much it is a primary driver or a secondary driver. Now, for some destinations in Canada, it will be more significant, whereas other destinations, the outdoor offer will probably be predominant. So it's worth thinking about, how is the area that you live and work in being presented as a tourism offer? So, for example, when I was looking at Montreal, it highlights one of its strategic priorities from a tourism perspective as highlighting Montreal's authenticity and creativity. But I couldn't spot, and that's not to say it isn't there, how that's being measured from a data perspective. So there's just a few examples here for those who can see the screen of some of those data sets that I found. So at a national level, with Destination Canada, it highlights different industry sectors. And so those sectors, and some of you will know this already, are culinary tourism, Indigenous tourism, millennial travel, and ski tourism. So obviously, culture will fit within Indigenous tourism and potentially millennial travel, and maybe a little bit in culinary, but probably not. Certainly it won't in ski tourism, but there's a big gap there. So I think that's something that probably at a national level, and this is where working in partnership, you can help to try and influence policy in your local area, in the province and at national level. Because certainly I know, having visited, and I've only visited Vancouver and Toronto, so I can't speak for the whole of Canada, but I know there is a really strong, rich cultural offer. And there's a lot of potential there to develop more cultural tourists. So there's also Statistics Canada, and you can see there on the screen some of the travel and tourism statistics that you can easily access. And then I picked out Quebec and there's information there. You will see monthly reports on tourism. Now, of course, everything is skewed at the moment because of the pandemic. So it's worth looking back pre-pandemic. It's to get a sense of the tourism data that was available and the kinds of visitor numbers, visitor spend and behaviour, modes of transport, tourist arrivals that was in play before the pandemic. And then obviously at a city level, Montreal has various studies and reports and statistics that you can access. However, it can be quite difficult to what I've termed read across the cultural data that you have and tourism data. And we often work with research specialists who can do that work, who can draw from the tourism data and the cultural data to identify the potential markets, visitor numbers, visitor spend, and engagement for particular destinations. Because I think that's really important to understand where the potential is for the destination in which you are sited. The more you, as people working in the cultural sector, can understand the travel and tourism sector, and vice versa, the better. We so often find in bringing the worlds of culture and tourism together that they speak a different language, they have different priorities. Obviously, in the tourism sector, there's a lot of commercial operators, and there needs to be a kind of meeting of minds to understand that relationship. So in Manchester, where I'm based and I do a lot of work, we've spent years building those relationships between culture and tourism, so that now Marketing Manchester, who I did work for a few years ago, use culture and heritage as some of their primary messaging when promoting the city nationally and internationally. And that's a real shift, because years ago, they used to talk about Manchester, and this would probably be no surprise to anyone who knows Manchester, in terms of football, maybe music, shopping. And it's so much more, and I know I'm biased, but that has changed, but it's taken years to change that. And so if you can do some of that homework to understand your destination, but also think about on your own websites, do you talk about the destination in which you are located? Do you talk about other things that that visitors can do in your area? How is your local tourism organisation talking about you and other cultural organisations? Have they got it right? And it's very hard quite often on your own to push to make those changes. But as a collective group of partners, you can actually help to make that change. Okay, so I've talked a lot to you for the last 20 minutes. So I want you now, just individually, hopefully you've got pen and paper or an iPad or something, where you can just try and answer these few questions. So I'll just read them out. Who could you work in partnership with to attract cultural tourists? Who in your area could you work with? Or who are you already working with, but you might be able to then think about how you bring cultural tourism into that partnership working? And knowing what data you have access to already, what more do you need to know about the cultural tourists who are coming to your area? And how can you collect more relevant data to help to expand your knowledge of cultural tourists? And therefore, where are your cultural tourism data gaps? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So that's till 1:25, I think, in your time, if I've got my timings right. And then if anyone wants to share any comments in the chat, feel free to do that. And then we're going to move on to a little discussion. So I will leave you to do that, and I'll check to see how we're doing with any comments so far. So just a reminder to anyone who has just joined, and apologies that you've missed what I've just been talking about, but hopefully you'll be able to still answer these questions. Just jot them down. Who could you work with in partnership to attract cultural tourists? What more do you need to know about cultural tourists in your area? And how can you collect relevant data? And where are your cultural tourism data gaps? Feel free to pop any questions in the chat function and I'll respond to those, or any comments that you might have. Some of you may already be working with partners on cultural tourism, and I'd love to hear about that as well. Okay, so I'm just going to read out a question that Tammy Lee posted in the chat and my response. She did say that she'd been to Manchester International Festival, which is great to hear. And I just messaged back to say, well, they just announced this year's programme yesterday, if anyone's interested to have a look. Tammy Lee asked if there are enough relevant digital data sets available to creative tourists. And I posted back to say we've worked in partnership with city, regional and national tourism agencies to access tourism data and then cross-reference it with cultural data, often working with the audience agency, who are one of the conference partners. But you have to keep revisiting it as it changes year on year. From a digital perspective, I'm going to come on to that later in the session, because we've done quite a lot of work around that as well. So has everybody finished answering the questions? If you want to use the reaction, yes, Tammy Lee said, thank you, audience agency certainly helps. Yes, there are other providers, of course, as well. But if you want to let me know if everyone's finished. It's just 1 minute before I carry on. Okay, clocked over to 25 past, so I'll carry on now. Does anyone want to, I'll just stop the share for a second so that I can see the screen better. Does anyone want to share any of their answers, either on the chat or be brave enough to turn their camera on and turn off mute? Don't worry if not, that's absolutely fine. You can just put your hand up or use the reaction hand signal. No, nobody's feeling brave enough. That's okay, don't worry. I will go back to sharing the screen. Okay, so what would be really good to know, though, is whether any of you have worked with your local public sector tourism agency, and if you have, how, and also what tourism data sets you, oops, I've just skipped forward, apologies. What tourism data sets you have access to, oh, I've done it again, sorry. What tourism data sets you have access to and how you have used them, and if so, how. So does anyone want to let me know on that? I'll just stop the share again so I can see. So Daphne said we do work with Tourism Montreal. Do you want to explain a bit, Daphne, how you work with them, if you're feeling brave enough to do that, or just pop that on the chat? Might be typing. Anyone else work with any tourism public sector agencies, or have accessed and used any tourism data? So Daphne's just said, but we don't have access to any particular data set, or that I know. Okay, that's not surprising. As I said, we found when we started working in cultural tourism many years ago that we were really struggling, that the tourism bodies weren't actually asking the right questions and therefore didn't have the right data. So it's worth going back to them and talking to them, maybe with other partners in your city, to ask what data that they have, or how they could actually do more data collection to give you more information, because certainly as a city, Montreal is a world cultural destination. So a lot of visitors will be visiting because of the cultural offer. So it'd be really interesting to find out more detail about what it is they're particularly wanting to experience, what they're doing when they visit, and that will help them as well as much as it will help you. Anybody else want to share? Okay, so I will just go back to share the screen and we will move on. So you've seen this slide twice before, briefly. So I'm going to talk now about culture hosts, which I introduced at the start of the session. And for those that may have missed it, this image on the right of creativetourist.com is a website that we run that promotes the cultural offer across the north of England. And it's powered by an integrated online listings platform called Culture Hosts, which we created. We use existing software, so it's not that the technical innovation is in the use of the software. The innovation is actually in the use of pulling the different elements of the software together to create this platform that powers a number of different websites. So Culture Hosts itself, whilst I showed you at the start, there is a front end, which is just a login for people who use Culture Hosts. In other words, the partners who are uploading content. It's a back end functionality. So if you imagine in non-technical terms, our consumer facing website, creativetourist.com, is built on top of a listings platform. So we have a series of editors, and they cover, you can see here, you might be able to see on the screen, they cover cinema, exhibitions, food and drink, families, literature, music, theatre, tours and activities. And those editors are able to pull listings information through and write guides relating to those listings. We also we sell campaigns on creativetourist.com. So you'll see here Liverpool Biennial, which is on at the moment, which is a contemporary visual arts festival, has bought a package with us, which gets them a certain number of inclusions.
Certain nombre d'inclusions.
In things like our newsletter.
Telles que des communiqués de presse.
And social media.
Et les médias sociaux.
So the way that it works.
La façon dont ça fonctionne.
By the way, I can hear the translation all of a sudden. I don't know why.
Soudain, j'entends pas la traduction, je ne sais pas pourquoi.
People upload their listings.
Les gens donc mettent leur liste derrière donc le site web. Et ensuite, on peut mettre cette information
via what is called an API, which if you think of it like a hose of content, so that information can be pulled through from, say, a box office, your box office, and it can be fed through to creativetourist.com or visitmanchester.com. So we say it's upload once,
il faut charger,
and publish many times. And I've got a little diagram to show you.
J'ai un petit diagramme pour.
Hi, Helen. I think we might be having some issues with the translation. So maybe just give one moment. Simon, are you able to help us out here? We seem to be getting the translation coming through, and then when it turned off, some people couldn't hear Helen.
Seemed to be working well when Alan used it.
Now I don't have the translation here on my screen. Can somebody hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I'm going to do something.
That's the problem.
Simon, are you able to sort that?
Should be fixed now.
Thank you. Shall I
I still don't see it. Am I assigned now as an interpreter?
No, you're not.
You're Philip Vitsu, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
Second time is a charm.
I think that's,
are we all working now?
I think that's now working, Helen.
Brilliant. So I'm not sure how much people may have missed. So probably the best thing to do is if I start again on this screen. So apologies if you did hear this, but I'll just recap. So Culture Hosts is a platform we have created, which is an integrated online listings platform, pulling together existing software to create this platform. It powers listings to consumer-facing websites. And on the screen here, you will see a screen grab from our website, creativetourist.com, which promotes the cultural offer across the north of England. And on the screen here, you can see things to do in Liverpool. We have a number of editors who are specialists in their area, and that covers cinema, exhibitions, food and drink, families, literature, music, theatre, tours and activities. And they can use that listings content to create guides, art form guides, city guides, could be guides for the families, all sorts of different ways of using that content. But the people who upload the listings, so all of those cultural partners we work with, hundreds across the north of England, can upload their contents for free to Culture Hosts, and I'll show you how they do that in a moment, either manually, filling out forms, or through an API. And don't ask me to say what that stands for, it's a technical term, but think of it as a content hose. So we can pull content directly from organisations' box offices that are signed up to Culture Hosts, and we can at the other end send that content out to consumer-facing websites like creativetourist.com. But because of the way that we have structured the data, we can be really specific on how we do that. So we can, if someone's interested in, say, audio described performances, we can pull just audio described performances. So we're very detailed in the level of the structured data that we use. But what makes this exciting, it's not the technical stuff, it's not the content itself per se, it's how working collaboratively in a destination can really make a difference. So how we aggregate and structure and distribute that data in the service of destinations. So, as I mentioned, and this is this image here is from visitmanchester.com's website. They pull our cultural listings through an API. So they've chosen just some of our listings. They don't want our food and drink listings because they've got that already, but they pull our culture listings through. And then they can incorporate that into guides that they want to produce as well. So that structured listings is really important. It's the core of Culture Hosts. And as I mentioned, we can produce art form guides, destination guides. We can be really flexible to the needs of the clients that we're working with. But we're always looking at it through the lens of a destination. And the core of this is about partner working. So we have been doing a lot of work around working with consortia to develop digital partner marketing. And I'm going to give you an example of that shortly. So this is an example, some screenshots from the back end of Culture Hosts. don't worry that you can't read it. This is purely to demonstrate how we have set up the structured data. So basically, it's filling in boxes and ticking boxes. It is that easy. So for some organizations who don't have a box office, it means they can still give us their listings data, and they can still then get onto websites that they maybe not be able to get onto themselves. And it's a very straightforward back-end facility. We're actually upgrading it at the moment as well to make it even easier to use for our clients. So this is how it works in Manchester. Here is culture hosts, all that listings data I've just talked about. And through an API software connection, we send listings through to our own website, to another listings website, which is called Manchester Wire, which just focuses on Manchester listings, through another website in Manchester, which is we've worked with the City Council to develop, which is very much focusing on the offer for neighbourhood communities. So in here, there's much more focus on free events, activities taking place at libraries, community centres that are on people's doorsteps, not just what's happening in the city centre. As I mentioned, we send cultural listings through to visitmanchester.com. There's also a relatively new scheme called Our Pass, which is Greater Manchester wide, so that's 10 boroughs. It's about 2.5 million people in Greater Manchester, which I know is tiny in comparison to some of the numbers in Canada. And that is a bus pass, a free bus pass for 16 to 18-year-olds to encourage them to visit different places across the 10 boroughs. So they take our cultural listings and they appear on the Our Pass website. And then we can go right down to a very localized geographical area, in this case, Oxford Road corridor. And Oxford Road is one of the key routes in the city centre, of which there are 2 universities, a number of hospital trusts, science parks, libraries, cultural organisations. And it enables them to share information with their partners. So they use it more in a business to business way to be able to say what's happening on the corridor. And we're always looking for new places that we can share that listings. We don't charge for the listings because the listings have been given to us free of charge. There is a charge to set up an API, which is basically so web developers can make the connections right. Where we, if you like, make our money is in working with the partnership to set up their culture hosts cluster and managing that relationship. And then there is a small maintenance charge each year because we're constantly updating culture hosts to make sure it's working the best that it can for the clients that we're working with. So we have clusters in different parts of the country in the UK, from Southend on the southeast coast through to Wakefield in Yorkshire, and obviously all of these in Manchester and various other places that we're working on. And one of the interesting things that we're doing is we've just started working with the West Midlands area in England, who will be hosting next year's Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. And we're working with the West Midlands to look at creating a digital visitor information network across those areas of the West Midlands based around culture hosts and the next iteration of culture hosts, so that the region can leverage the benefits, the tourism benefits of the Commonwealth Games. So in other words, make sure that access to information, visitor information, is easy to find and use and share. And so we're just starting that process now, and that will be transformational for that West Midlands area. Okay, so part of the work that we do off the back of Culture Hosts, because we realise that you could have your listings integrated with consumer-facing websites, but unless you had good digital tracking in order, you couldn't properly understand the impact of the work that you're doing. And from a destination perspective, we want to look at the impact across a destination. So this is part of what we've been rolling out in different places in the UK, and including part of the work we'll be doing in the West Midlands around Birmingham's Commonwealth Games. So pretty much everybody has a website now that is also connected to Google Analytics. What we find is that the majority of people have not got Google Analytics set up particularly well. So we do a review. People can give us access to their Google Analytics just to view, not to do anything else with, for a set period of time so we can audit. And then we can provide recommendations and say, this, you need to sort out your tracking in this way, and we can help to do that. And what we do with a partnership is look at where there's a joint campaign opportunity for those partners to work together. And that's really important. We've done lots of training with individual organizations and with destination partnerships around Google Analytics. And that's really useful. But until there's a practical application, it has limited impact, and particularly at a destination level. And I know there's work going on in Toronto looking at audience analytics. I learned from being on that session yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see what the synergies are with the work that we're doing. So in identifying a joint campaign opportunity, you can look to set up campaign tracking so that you can develop digital partner marketing campaigns. And once you've implemented that tracking, we can then monitor and evaluate that activity and provide a report showing what's worked and what hasn't. And what we found was, and this is the same in all the places that we've worked, that to start with, it was a bit haphazard. So people will say, oh yes, we want to be part of this, and then they don't really properly participate. But as soon as you can demonstrate impact, you'll get more partners joining and properly participating. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the work that we did in Bristol and Bath in the southwest of England. And for those of you that may not know, Bristol and Bath are only 12 minutes apart by train, but they can feel worlds apart. Bath is internationally known as a Roman and Georgian city, often overrun with tourists at the weekend, particularly day visitors. Bristol is a post-industrial port city, much more known for its contemporary arts offer, can often be busy during the week, but a lot quieter at weekends. And so they were able to source 3 years of funding, which actually extended for another 4 years, I think, to work collaboratively. And we worked with them through that process. And that enabled them to bring together some central coordination in Bristol and Bath, a coordinator. They created a central website, here Go Bath Bristol, as the main call to action, but you don't necessarily have to have a central website. You can still do it by using each other's websites and promotional tools. So they created something called flash sales. And this was a January campaign offering discounts to locals and visitors for a short period of time. And it was a way that they could also collect data, because people had to register to be able to access those offers. And it was so successful, they've actually repeated it. And it was a way to get to some visitors that and residents that they hadn't really been engaging with before. And off the back of that, they then created something called the Residents Weekender, which was actually modelled on something that we did in Manchester, the Manchester Weekender, where we invested in some additional cultural and creative activity, a lot of it outdoors or in unusual locations, indoors and outdoors, to create a sense of almost like a mini festival, but profiling the city's cultural offer. That was the key thing. So those city cultural partners were part of programming that work. And that residence weekend was to encourage people to visit both cities, that actually you could for a weekend or even just one day go to both cities and have cultural experiences. And that worked so well that they repeated that. But what they found when they first did it was that all the partners weren't participating as they should have been. But because of the evaluation, they were then able to say, right, we need to properly commit to this. It does actually have an impact. And if we all commit to cross-promoting each other, not worrying about individual competition, but thinking at a destination level, if I promote your organisation and you promote me, we're all going to benefit. And that's quite a shift in thinking for a lot of organisations. So being able to demonstrate and share those learnings made a real difference. And it helped to grow the partnership, because then what happened is other organisations came to the coordinator and said, we've heard about these projects, can we participate? And so it's helped to grow the audiences for the cultural offer in those two cities. Okay, so here's a little example, and apologies if the box of me obliterates some of the image, but I'll just explain it. So here on the left, you can see a list of some of the cultural partners, and funnily enough, Colston Hall has changed its name. The news about Edward Colston's statue in Bristol may even have reached Canada. So they didn't change the name because of that. They were already going to do it, but they're now called the Bristol Beacon. So they were one of the partners across the two cities who all implemented campaign tracking through Google Analytics, and we helped them to do that. And then we crunched we used Power BI dashboard integration software, which some of you may have come across, to draw out the data, anonymized data, to be able to create reports that we could share back with the partners and stakeholders. And that was really helpful for them to be able to understand the impact of that partnership working. And we do that with all the partnerships that we work with. So that was a bit of a rattle through some of the projects and some of the work that we're doing around cultural tourism. So what next for cultural tourism? Well, even before the pandemic, we saw a real growth in online search and online booking. And that, of course, has sped up as a result of the pandemic, and it's not going away. So people will always go first to look online for their information, the majority, and particularly cultural tourists. And they won't just go to the official tourism website, and quite often they won't go to that at all. They will look around at different sites, at independent sites. So if you read creativetourist.com, for example, our tone of voice is very different to the official website, visitmanchester.com, which serves a different market. So that's really important because they're looking for that insider knowledge. But advanced bookings, particularly because of COVID, are now really important and will probably likely continue to be important, even if the attraction has a free offer. Now, what that means is, particularly for museums who are free or any attractions, now they can collect audience and visitor data in a way they've never been able to do before. Although I have to say that a number of those attractions have rushed to set up some kind of ticketing and have not checked whether they can actually access that data. So if you use something like Eventbrite, you can't get the audience data that you need. So we're also seeing ticketing systems rushing to serve the museums market now. So it's very interesting to see what's happening there. There's also a huge growth in the tours and excursions market, including virtual, which I think will continue even when we can all go back out and have in real life experiences. And we're seeing a growing number of younger cultural entrepreneurs creating tours and excursions for younger markets. So in the past, tours and excursions have always been for, let's say, more mature markets. And this is a very different offer now. Now, you may have come across online travel booking systems. There's a picture here of FareHarbor, and there are loads of them. FareHarbor, Boken, Get Your Guide, ResGo, there's loads of them. And basically, they all have different models, functionality, and pricing. But what they do is help you to manage your capacity and reach new visitor markets. So they can aggregate data and send that information to places like booking.com and Expedia and TripAdvisor. So you're accessing different kinds of markets. And for some organizations, that might be something to look at in addition to whatever ticketing or CRM system, customer relationship management system you might have. And we've been doing a lot of work across the north of England and the Republic of Ireland in working with cultural heritage and tourism suppliers to get their websites connected up to these online travel booking systems to be able to better manage their offer and reach new visitor markets. The thing, if you take away nothing else from this session, two things. One is about the importance of partnership working for cultural tourism, and the other is about getting the basics right, focusing on connecting digital channels and analytics. Don't get distracted by things like big data, AR, VR, and all the shiny new technology before you've got your basics right, because that will be transformational for your organization. So finally, some top tips. Build your local partnerships. Focus on the people who are willing first. Don't try and drag people in who don't want to be there. It will be a nightmare. Work with those who are willing. Look at what data you've got as an organization, but also your partners and what you can access through your tourism agencies. And look at where you've got data gaps and how can you fill those gaps. And that might be partly to do with your data collection. So you may want to add an extra question to a questionnaire that you normally do, or you may want to think about something you would do digitally. So think about the methodology of your data collection. And then when you're working in a partnership, like you would with any kind of arts marketing activity, prioritize and focus on the target cultural tourist markets you want to work with. So that might be, say, people who are visiting friends and relations, or it might be family groups, or it might be couples, or however you break those markets down, that will help rather than thinking in this very concept generic way. And that will also depend on who is already visiting your destination. So if you know that information, you've got more chance of being able to properly hone your target cultural tourist markets. As I mentioned, review your Google Analytics. Have you got all the tracking in place that you should have? And find an opportunity to work collaboratively on a joint campaign that you can test and pilot and evaluate and go again. So that is me. I have a few final things that I need to say, and I need to check the chat function. So thank you. I'm just checking if there's anything else. Someone has kindly spelt out API for me because I can never remember. Thanks, Marc-Andre. That is Application Programming Interface. Tammy Lee has asked, will Data Echo be able to share Helen Palmer's keynote or PowerPoint presentation? I have no problem with that, so I will ask them and hopefully they'll be able to do that.
It's going to happen in around 2 weeks. We're going to share every presentation with everyone who wants to see it.
Fantastic, thank you. And I know you want to pop a survey up now, which is just one quick question. If you wouldn't all mind just answering the question, that will be great. There you go. So I won't look at the answers. Are you satisfied with the activity you just participated in? While you're doing that, I just want to say a huge thank you for participating today. I hope you found it useful. I want to thank the Audience Agency and all the partners of the Data Echo Culture Conference for inviting me to do this. And just to say that there is another session, the final session, I believe, which is the closing of the conference coming up in a minute, which is Where From Here, and that'll be followed by an artistic performance by Charlene Daly, presented by Eastern Bloc. So, thank you for the lovely comments that people are putting up in the chat as well. I very much appreciate that. And if you have any queries, you can have a look at ctconsults.com and you can get in touch. And we're on Twitter at ctconsults, email helen@ctconsults.com. My profile is on the conference platform. And I hope some of you get stuck in with your cultural tourism participation as well. So that's all from me. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.